Welcome to Recover an RSA Private Key from a TLS session with Perfect Forward Secrecy in South Seas CDF with Marco Ortiz. Before we begin, a few brief notes. Stop by the business hall located in Bayside AB during the day and for the welcome reception from 5:30 to 7 p.m. tonight. The Black Hat Arsenal is on the Palm Foyer on Level 3. Join us for the Pony Awards in Mandalay Bay, BCD, at 6:30 p.m. Thanks for putting your phone on vibrate. It makes it easier for the rest of us to ignore the ringing while you wait for your voicemail to pick it up. And with that, we welcome our speaker.
Thank you, Caroline. Welcome, everybody. That is a really big audience. My name is Marco Ortiz. I am Senior Penetration Tester, and I really love buffer overflow vulnerability, and I adore exotic bugs like that one that I'm going to introduce in this speech. Another bit of information about me. Now we are approximately here, but I'm coming from here, and this is Sicily. There is a 9 hours jet lag. So if I look affected by dyslexia, you know why. So about the topic. As I told you, I really like exotic vulnerability, and retrieving a RSA private key just by sniffing the TLS traffic or interacting with a TLS service looks quite exotic to me. And it is done via a side channel attack, which is 100% reproducible. So what about the roadmap? I will be giving you an historical introduction about this vulnerability, showing very soon a demo. Afterward, we will cover more detail about the attack. And finally, a second demo is shown, and at the end will be the time for greetings and questions, if any. So let's start from an historical introduction about the problem. Exactly 20 years ago, Harry Lestra wrote a theoretical memo by warning that when RSA CRT is used for the calculation of digital signature and an hardware fault takes place during the computation of the signature, actually this condition can trigger a series of events leading to the private key leakage. The RSA CRT is basically an optimization for the calculation of digital signature. And from now on, we will refer to this attack as the Lenstra attack or the RSA CRT attack. So for this topic, it's very important give a brief introduction about how RSA works, so a brief introduction about public key encryption, and especially it is very important to cover the concept of digital signature. With RSA, we own a couple of keys. We freely distribute our public key so that someone can use it to send us an encrypted message. And we use our private key, that as the name suggests must be kept secret, to decrypt that message. And the private key is not only used for decrypting something, but also to sign something. And actually signing is the action to generate a digital signature. To oversimplify, you can see it as an encryption operation. And in this case, conversely, the recipient uses our public key to verify the correctness of the signature. And to oversimplify again, you can see it as a decryption operation. So during the Lenstra memo and later on, somebody conjectured that the same attack was also effective against smart card if the attacker could actually artificially inject hardware faults during the computation of RSA signature. For example, by means of radiations, abnormal voltage, or CPU overheating, so with heating and things like that. In 2001, sorry, I'm going, okay. In 2001, two researchers actually discovered an attack against the OpenPGP format by exploiting the same principle described by Lenstra formally. Basically, if the attacker could get the archive containing the encrypted private key, tampering with it in a certain manner, and subsequently capturing digital signature, basically he or she could derive the private key of server. And until that moment, it was believed that the attack was possible only if the attacker had physical access to the target device or local access to the system. Only by the end of 2015, so very recently, Florian Weimer from Red Hat explained why the Lenstra attack brings remote impacts and implications. But unfortunately, together with his white paper, he didn't provide any tools or proof of concept, and I will try to fill up this gap during my speech. So, normally during a TLS session, what is revealed is the public key of server when it sends the public key inside the server certificate to the client. But sometimes it is also possible to retrieve the private key beyond, without going beyond that red line. So I mean, in the preliminary step, in the preliminary phase of the TLS handshake, before encryption and anti-tampering countermeasures take place. To do that, we require three preconditions that, as we will see later, are not so difficult to happen in real life. So basically, we require the presence of RSA signature, which is generated with the RSA CRT optimization. It must be applied on values that the attacker knows in plain text, and of course, it must be faulty. I mean, it must be generated in a wrong way by the server. What if the attack is successful? So basically, the private key, the server private key leaks. As an attacker, we can impersonate the real server or device. And of course, we can place any man-in-the-middle attacks without alerting the legitimate client. And from that to this, it makes the difference when an attack is underway. Now, demo fast as ever. And because I feel brave, I want to give you a live demo. I want to show you the effect of the Lenstra attack before to continue with the technical stuff. So basically, I have created a tool called high voltage that when the three preconditions that I shown before, I shown briefly, are met, it is able to recover the private key. So in my virtual machine, I deployed to two different versions of OpenSSL. One of this version that we will call the good one has been actually downloaded by the default repository, and the other one that we will call the bad one has been patched in a way that RSA digital signature, a faulty RSA digital signature, is injected during a TLS handshake. In our context, the top window is the attacker window, and the bottom window is the server window. So, first of all, what I'm going to do is to generate a new certificate for the server and the new private key. We use RSA 40,096 bits, so a strong key. Okay, now I'm going to run this other script that basically executes a TLS service by using the good version of OpenSSL. And after 11 seconds, this service is killed, and it is run again, this time with the bad version of OpenSSL. And this could simulate the injection of a faulty signature. Instead, on client side, we will use high voltage And basically, we pass to this tool only to mandatory options, which are basically the IP address of server and the port of the service. Okay, so I'm running on server-side the TLS service, and contemporary I run high voltage. And now the tool starts to establish multiple TLS handshakes until a faulty signature is detected. And apparently, there has been a faulty signature. And so apparently, the private key of server has been recovered. To verify this, let's compare the two private keys. So the private key generated by the tool and the private key on server side. Okay. The name of the server key is new one on server side. Okay, just compare, for example, the first 3 bytes here and here. If you can see, they are the same. And if you compare any other bytes, for example, we can go at the end of the key, sorry, and also here at the end of the private exponent, you can see that also here and here we have a match. So basically the tool has been able to recover the private key of server. Okay. So this is a security bulletin from Dell. And it is a security bulletin for one of their products, a firewall solution which is called Sonic Wall, and was affected by this problem. And actually, they said that this attack requires a highly sophisticated tool which is not available to the general public, but now it is for all of you. Okay, let's dig a little bit about the prerequisites of this attack. Firstly, we say that we require a RSA signature, which is calculated by using RSA CRT. As I told you, RSA CRT is an optimization for the calculation of digital signature, because the exponentiation operation of RSA is computationally heavy, especially when we use the private key. And I personally don't know a single implementation, a single crypto library out there that is not using RSA CRT for the computational digital signature. So we can say that this precondition is always satisfied. It is normally satisfied. So we require a faulty signature. And in the context of this speech, we define a faulty signature with the letter Y. This is an unpredictable condition, so it is something that the attacker cannot control, but it is something that you can see very often, that happens very often in the embedded device world. If you think about bit spotting attack, basically they are using the same principle. So sometimes there is some bit flippings. It is due to CPU overheating, to RAM error, stuff like that. And when this happens, actually a faulty signature is generated. So even if this condition is not, cannot be controlled by the attacker, we can say that sooner or later it will happen. And the last precondition is that the signature must be calculated on values the attackers known in plain text. This is very important. And we define the value that must be signed with the letter hex for the purposes of our talk. So basically, the digital signature is nothing more than a plain text value that is hashed, then padded, and at the end, it is encrypted with the private key of the server. So from each of these passages actually mutate and alter the shape of X. So from the plain text to the hashed form, there is no problem until we know the hashing function that has been used to generate that hash. And it is something that the user knows just by observing the TLS protocol, the version of the TLS protocol used. But from the hashing function to the padded form, we could experience some problem, because the RSA standard defines some not deterministic way to generate padding, such as RSA PSS. But likely for the attacker, from the version of SSL 3.0 to up to TLS 1.2, actually the padding scheme used is fully deterministic. So it is not randomized, and it means that it is predictable. Just to give you an example, let's assume that we have this hash, and it is our payload. This is our PKCS 1.5, which is the default padding scheme used with TLS. Actually, how PKCS transform our payload. As you can see, the green byte 0001 is always prepended to the padding bytes. And 00, the black byte, is always appended at the end. And in the middle, there is a long, more or less long series of FF bytes that basically are the padding. And this depends on the size, on the length of the payload, because probably you have to know that the message that is padded must have the same length of the key used to sign the message. So as you can see here, it is quite predictable. It is not randomized. And this is how PKCS 1.5 transform our payload when TLS 1.0 and TLS 1.1 is negotiated, is used. For TLS 1.2, there is a slight difference. So basically, between the black byte and the red part, the payload, basically it is appended the there-encoded form of the object identifier for the hashing algorithm used to generate this hash. So basically, there is the negotiation of the hash that is used to generate this hash, basically. And the most important part here is that the padding scheme is fully deterministic. So it is something that we can predict upfront. And of course, we require the presence of a digital signature somewhere in the TLS and the shake. And this condition is always satisfied if we carefully negotiate the right cyberscript. For example, let's see what happened when we negotiate the cyberscript. So basically, RSA here is used both for authentication and has a key exchange mechanism. AES is the symmetric algorithm, CBC the mode of operation, and SHA is the hashing algorithm. So when the RSA private key is leaked in this context, not only the current session, but also all those ones established in the past and the future with the same private key are compromised. And the certificate message, in this case, contains a signature, but the signature is generated with the private key of the certification authority or the private key of the server if we have a self-signed certificate. But this signature is actually statically embedded and not dynamically generated. And we can say that this cyberscript is not good for our purposes. What if instead we use this kind of cybersuites? So actually, elliptic curve diffie-Hellman ephemeral or diffie-Hellman ephemeral only is used as key exchange mechanism. Instead, RSA is only used for authentication. This is very important. The rest is the same and doesn't matter. So in this case, the key exchange is done by using some private and public key which are generated on the fly. And this is very important because if the private key of a specific TLS session is compromised, in this case, only that session is compromised, not the previous one or that one that are established in the future. And this feature is called perfect forward secrecy. And perfect forward secrecy actually fits perfectly to us because when we negotiate this kind of cybersuite, a dynamically generated signature is embedded inside the server key exchange message. And this message is only exchanged when perfect forward secrecy is negotiated. So this is how high voltage, the tool that you have seen previously, basically works. So it sends a TLS client hello message by negotiating perfect forward secrecy cybersuites only. And it takes note by a 32-byte structure, which is called the random structure. The server answers with the TLS server hello packet. And in this case as well, the tool takes note of the 32-byte random structure. Afterward, the server sends the certificates. Two pieces of information are very important here. N, which is a big semi-prime number, and E, which is actually a small exponent, such as 3 or 65,537. Together, N and E represent the public key of server. And finally, the server transmits the TLS server key exchange packet that actually contain a structure called server parameters, which is very important for our attack. And also the tool takes note of the signature, which is embedded in this packet. And the signature is actually generated on these three pieces, calculated on these three pieces of information. And this is because the tool collects this information, because these three pieces of information actually allow us to detect if the signature is valid or not. And as I told you previously, the presence of a faulty signature is very important. So, how to detect a faulty signature? Just looking for them. For example, with TLS 1.1 or TLS 1.0, basically, the tools collect all the messages from the client hello up to the server key exchange message by extracting the information that it needs. And it creates actually two hashes, MD5 hash and the SHA-1 hash, giving as input the collected information. And these hashes are actually concatenated together. Next, the tools use the public key of the server to decrypt the digital signature inside the server key exchange message. From there, the padding is removed, and then the result is compared with the hashes that has been calculated offline. If there is a match, actually the signature is valid. If there is a mismatch, it is of course the condition that the attacker wants to happen. If there is a mismatch, actually it means that the signature is faulty, and the attack can continue by applying the original Lenstra attack of 20 years ago. With TLS 1.2, the procedure is basically the same, but instead of generating the MD5 and SHA-1 hash, actually the hashing algorithm used is specified inside the TLS server key exchange message. So now we have a faulty digital signature. How can we continue with the attack? We need to apply the Lenstra attack, as I told you previously. And to understand the specific attack, we need also to understand how RSA works and what is the RSA CRT optimization. And finally, I will show you a second demo. So RSA is a very simple algorithm because every operation can be described in terms of multiplication, modulo, or exponentiation operations. For example, these are the two formulas used for encryption and decryption. And basically here, in this context, C is the ciphertext, N is the message to encrypt, and D represent the public key, while E is a little exponent, a small number, such as 3 or 65,537. N is instead a big semi-prime number that is given by the multiplication of two prime numbers, P and Q. And the security of RSA rotates entirely the fact that P and Q are unknown to the attacker. D instead is the private key, which is generated by providing three pieces of information to the inverse modular function, which are P, Q, and E. So by getting P and Q, we can calculate the private key of server very easily because E is already a public information. So if you remember, I told you that actually the security of RSA rotates entirely the fact that the prime numbers P and Q are unknown to the attacker. But actually, it is even worse than this. Because if the attacker can collect just one of P and Q, he or she can actually derive the other prime number, and then the private key can be calculated very easily. So to understand this concept, just reason on a small number. For example, let's assume that the value of N inside the certificate is 77, and for some reason, the attacker was able to derive one of the prime factors of N and assume that, in this case, P is equals to 7. So we can derive the other prime factor Q very easily just by dividing N by P. And if instead the attacker has Q, knows the value of Q, he can derive P very easily just by dividing N by Q. And of course, Q multiplied P give us the value of N. So the RSA CRT optimization. RSA CRT is basically, as I told you, is an optimization that speeds up the calculation of RSA digital signature. And basically, the calculation of RSA is broken down into small pieces. So if you want to sign something with RSA CRT, there are some values that are pre-computed and some other values that are generated, that are calculated on the fly. And especially the calculation of S1 and S2 is very critical, because if there is a fault during the calculation of one of these two values, basically a faulty signature is generated. And a prime factor of N, prime factor of the public key, can be derived, can be calculated by using the greatest common divisor function. And actually, it is the Lenstra, it is the Lenstra memo, the Lenstra attack of 1996. And the value that we need to feed this function are actually values that the attacker can get very easily, because Y, which is the faulty signature, can be extracted from the TLS server key exchange message. E, which is the public exponent, is found inside the certificate. Hex is the original hashed, and it is the original value that has been hashed and padded. And if you remember, PKCS 1.5 is a padding scheme deterministic. And N is the public key of the server that can be also found inside the certificate. So they are all public information. So the attack exploited by the tool, high voltage, that I've created now should be very clear, because basically the tool established multiple TLS handshakes trying to detecting a faulty signature. When a faulty signature is detected, the Lenstra attack is executed, and this allows us to derive one of the prime factor of the public key, whatever, or P or Q, it doesn't matter. When we have one prime factor, actually we can derive the other one very easily, as I've shown you previously. And once you have both of P and Q, you can actually calculate the private key. And this is game over. So, as probably you may have noted, basically all these pieces of information, all the pieces of information that we need to exploit the Lenstra attack are exchanged in clear text over the network. So this means that basically we can just sniff the TLS traffic looking for the information that are useful to us, and we can conduct this kind of attack not only actively, but also passively sniffing the network. And to demonstrate this concept, I have created the second tool that I've called Picciola, and I want to give you a live demo of this other tool as well. So basically, Picciola is composed by two components, a bash script and a C application program. And it works on traffic dump capture with TCP dump or Wiresharks. Basically, every traffic dump written inside a pickup file. So what we are going to do, first of all, we have inside this directory different pickup files. First of all, we want to uncompress every TCP streams inside this pickup file. To do that, we use the TCP flow tools, or actually we can use the script that make the job for us. So basically now inside this directory we have different TCP streams. And we need just to execute Picciola by passing the name of the directory containing all the uncompressed streams, and actually it starts the elaboration. And at the end of this, of the analysis of each TCP streams, basically different directories are created. For example, the incomplete directory contains all the TCP streams where only the client payload was detected and not the server payload, or vice versa. The not TLS directory contains all the TCP streams that actually are not referring to SSL or TLS connection. The TLS not affected directory actually contains every TCP stream which is a TLS session, but for which has not been possible to derive the private key. Instead, the results directory is where the private key leaked are written. So for each session, it is created a random directory, and inside of this directory we can find the stream files describing the communication between client and server, and of course we can find the certificate, the public key, and the private key derived by high voltage. Sorry, by Picciola. So, what does it mean? It means, I repeat, that basically we can use this kind of attack actively, so by establishing multiple TLS handshake, or we can just sniff the traffic of our network. So it is a proof of concept. I mean, Picciola is a proof of concept, but you might use it to detect, for example, faulty signature by analyzing your network traffic dump. And of course, to exploit this vulnerability, you require that your application is linked to one of the crypto libraries vulnerable, and there are plenty of those. This is just a brief list of crypto library that has been found vulnerable or for which the vendor declared to be vulnerable. Instead, regarding the hardware part, basically the affected devices are security devices such as firewall, VPN concentrator, and UTM solutions, and stuff like that, that is supposed to protect the boundaries of a company or the privacy of the users. And this is a brief list, not complete list of devices that are affected by the problem, and we have other vendors affected as well. It is very difficult, especially when you try to scan the internet, to identify specifically a version or a model of a vulnerable device, because sometimes the exact model or version is not specified inside the certificate, and inside the certificate you can find, I don't know, some generic indication for the vendor. And the last device that I have found vulnerable is in June, actually, is this surveillance camera from the link. So also surveillance camera and printers are affected by this problem. The fix. Some crypto libraries allows the user to disable the CRT, the RSA CRT optimization, but it is not suggestible, it is not advisable for performance reasons. And of course, if you have if you are using a vulnerable library, you can compare the version that you are using with the list that I have specified in the slide. So now the question is only TLS affected by this problem? The question is no, because out there, a lot of protocols are using perfect forward secrecy and RSA as algorithms. And I believe that in this sense, we require much more research in future, I mean in this specific field, because there are some assumptions that are not revealing so true. For example, it is believed so far that it is not possible to derive a private key from an IPsec session just by sniffing the traffic. So it is believed that you have to actively interact with the Hike service. In fact, Hike version 1 is a really important part of the IPsec stack because allow the peers to negotiate authentication and the so-called security associations. And actually, in the Hike version 1, we can see that during a phase called phase 1, where authentication and negotiation of security associations of the peer is done, basically, two modes are supported by Hike version 1, which are the main mode and the aggressive mode. Both of these modes actually support a so-called RSA signature authentication, which is based on digital certificate. And this is what happens when the main mode in Hike version 1 is used. As you can see, on packet number 5, basically the initiator, which is the attacker, must send a certificate and its signature. And this means that the attacker requires a valid certificate if you want to continue in the handshake, because if it provides a bad certificate, actually the server should drop the connection or should discard the connection. And another problem is that the server transmits the certificate and its signature only on packet 6, which is actually exchanged inside an encrypted channel. So this is because of the assumption that you need to be an active attacker in order to derive the private key. But what happens if we instead use the aggressive mode on with IK version 1? So basically, the certificate and the signature of server is used on packet number 2. So it is used in the very preliminary phase of the handshake. And this exchange happens inside a clear text channel, basically. So if we use IK version 1 in aggressive mode with digital signature, with signature authentication, basically, if all the preconditions are met in just 2 packets, we can derive the private key of the server. Let me conclude with some special thanks to my colleague Frank Bosman that has provided the nice drawings that you have seen so far, and of course Florian Weimer for his pioneering research. And also, if you want to visit Sicily, please let me know, especially the green and the yellow part. If you do that, I will offer you a drink. And if you have any question, I'm here. I just want to tell you last thing. So this year, every talk at Black Hat is evaluated, so you should have received an email. And if you enjoyed my talk, and if you like to give a good evaluation to my talk, I will really appreciate you for that. I have concluded. Thank you.